You may be wondering, what is the point? What is the point of all of these podcasts you've been listening to about personal productivity, about career development? What is the point of all of the process that you've been learning about? What is the whole idea? What is the kind of macro picture? How can I think about this without having to remember every single detail every single time? I know this is the place that I find myself very often, and returning to some kind of principles-based understanding of the point is helpful. So that's what we're going to do in today's episode. I want to talk to you about two basic principles that virtually all of the information that you get on this podcast and on other podcasts, at least as it relates to productivity, to habits, to process, all of those parts of the advice that we give on this show and the advice that you hear on other shows, I want to bring it down to two simple principles that you can then kind of extrapolate and hopefully find your own ways of thinking about these things. These principles are where you would start from, by the way, using these principles and going and doing your own kind of investigation, research, whatever you want to call it, in areas of other mental models to determine, okay, how can I apply learning from social sciences to my career as a software engineer? And it may not be immediately obvious when you think about it in those terms, but if you put on this lens of these two principles we're going to talk about today, then drawing on those mental models from cross examples, cross domains, is a much more productive process. So that's why I want you to have these. It also will help you kind of test the mettle of any given idea as it relates to productivity. So we're going to talk about two principles today. But first, we need to kind of lay this meta framework for what it is that we're even talking about. When we talk about productivity, when we talk about any kind of process, the productivity, the process, all of this, our habits, everything, are driven by some motivation. So coming into this discussion, it is assumed that you have a particular motivation that you're trying to accomplish, and maybe more than one motivation, maybe a series of motivations. And these can be personal, they can be corporate, they can be aspirational. Whatever the motivation is, there is a perceived destination or a perceived state. These are kind of fixed motivations. Or there's a perceived identity or process, and these are more dynamic motivations. A fixed motivation might look something like, I want to achieve this particular job potential, this particular title. And a process motivation might be, I want to align with this kind of value in my life. But the reason we have to clarify that up top as kind of a meta framework, that there is some motivation, that you care about something, that you're trying to either do or become a certain way, do something, become a certain way. These accomplishments are essentially the way that you would measure whether the advice was good in the first place. And that's over the course of many actions, of course, not just one-to-one. I took your advice and then I failed. Those are possible outcomes. But if you're taking the advice over and over and over and you're not seeing any results towards your motivations, then either you are unlucky or the advice is not very good, or perhaps a combination of both. So I want you to judge the advice you get on this show and any advice that you get through that kind of combined lens of, okay, have I applied this long enough to see a difference, one, and am I actually progressing towards the thing I'm motivated to progress towards? All right, so that's the meta framework. We're going to share the two principles. The first principle is, this is going to sound very reductive, reducing interruption. Reducing interruption. Why is reducing interruption such a big deal? We're going to talk about that right after we talk about today's sponsor. If I were to take a snapshot of your backlog, my guess is that you've got a bunch of bug reports in there. And my second guess would be that not every bug report looks the same. Your teammates have sent them to you, or maybe users have sent them in, but sometimes it's just a text description. No screenshot, no logs, no user ID, no additional context, no walkthrough. You have to go chasing the information on what the reproduction steps actually are. In my time as an engineer, I've seen some crazy bugs happen, things that you'd have to have all the context to be able to solve. And if you're wasting a bunch of time going and getting this information, as we're going to talk about in today's episode, the importance of having all this information up front so you can solve these bugs more holistically cannot be overstated. Today's sponsor is Jam. You can find them at jam.dev. Jam.dev, developer-friendly bug reports in one click. You may have heard of this already. It's already used by more than 75,000 people, probably more by the time this episode comes out. It's growing very quickly. That's because it's a free tool that saves software engineers a ton of time and frustration going back and forth. It forces your teammates to make the perfect bug report and improves your overall flow. Reducing interruption of having to go back and forth for that information is absolutely critical to your productivity, to your team's productivity. Your bug reports literally can't be wrong because they'll include information that you've probably never had in a bug report. It includes a video of the bug, the console.log, network requests, all the information you need to debug, like even what was the internet speed at the time that the bug occurred. It even automatically lists out the steps that you need to reproduce the bug to the degree that you can actually take these steps and create an automated test just by copying the attributes from the report. It's so easy to get your teammates to use because it's just a Chrome extension. When they see a bug, they just click a button and right away it creates a ticket in whatever your issue tracker is. So it saves time for them and it saves you a lot of hopping on calls and meetings to debug. Go and check it out. Head over to jam.dev. That's jam.dev. It's free. Sometimes the topic of the show serendipitously aligns with the sponsor of the day, as we were just talking about. Jam's whole kind of value proposition is to reduce interruption, and that's exactly what we're talking about in today's episode. This idea of reducing interruption is a core principle. It's a core principle of productivity and the advice that you receive around productivity. There's a concept discussed by Efrat Goldratt. She is the daughter of Eliyahu Goldratt. Eliyahu is most famous for writing some of the earliest books on the concept of the theory of constraints. In fact, his book, The Goal, actually introduced this concept. But Efrat discusses in a book called The Rules of Flow, which is using the principles from Eliyahu's book, The Goal. Efrat discusses the idea of a full kit. And similarly, Eliyahu talks about this in The Goal as well. The idea of a full kit is that in order to accomplish any particular chunk of a project, you need some amount of materials and tools and time, whatever other resources you may need. In the case of solving a bug report, you need the context related to the bug. And the whole idea of figuring out what the full kit would be to solve a bug report is to reduce interruption. Similarly, the many times that we've talked about multitasking or the myth of multitasking on this show, we're talking about the idea of interruption, reducing interruption. It's just as detrimental, okay? It would be just as detrimental if you stayed focused on a single task, but you had other types of interruptions. And one of the most amazing things about interruptions as they occur in the workplace is that they tend to not be accidental. They tend to be on purpose, not ill intent on purpose, not malicious, but on purpose in a way that we think they're going to produce a positive outcome rather than a negative one. This is kind of counterintuitive. We imagine that making progress on multiple things at once is what we need to be doing to be successful, that we have to keep a certain number of plates spinning, and thus we're willing to interrupt ourselves, we're willing to interrupt others because we have something that we think is important at that moment. It's important enough that the thing that we thought was important before can go on hold. Of course, the problems with interruptions we've detailed many times on the show, and you can see them in very simple illustrations and metaphors. I'll give you a few really quickly. Imagine you're on a road trip, and instead of getting a full tank of gas, you get only, let's say, a tenth of a tank of gas. And you're rationalizing this by saying, well, we don't know if maybe the next gas station we get to, maybe it will have a cheaper price for the tank of gas. And so we're only going to take a certain amount at a time. And so every time that your tank gets a little bit low or close to empty, you only fill it by 1/10. And so you're stopping, every 50 miles or something, which is taking a lot of extra time. Now, on the one hand, you may say that, well, we were able to save a certain amount of money with this strategy because we were only taking the gas that was the cheapest. We were always optimizing for a certain type of spend. On the other hand, you're discounting the importance and scarcity of time in this situation. And as a general rule, the principle of reducing interruption is about putting a premium on time. More specifically, if you recognize that you are spending time on things that are not producing value for you, specifically the switching costs. In the case of a car, getting off of the highway, the time spent finding a pump to pump the gas, all of this is not producing direct value. Once again, in this metaphor, the direct value is going back to that motivation kind of meta framework. The motivation is to arrive at a location, and you're not getting any closer to that location when you are looking for a gas pump. Another great example of this that's directly applicable to many managers is the status report, especially the frequency of status report and the style of status report. Imagine that you are tasked with writing an essay. And imagine that every time you wrote a paragraph, you had to look up at somebody who's watching. They're not looking at the paper, they're looking at you. And you're going to have to summarize whatever that paragraph says. Now, you may need to reference previous paragraphs in order to summarize what this paragraph says, but every paragraph you have to stop and explain what you just wrote to someone who's watching you. Now, this seems a little bit silly, right? It seems like the better way to do this would be to write a first draft of the essay in total, and then look up at the person and explain the first draft, and then go back and revise based on notes that you receive or something that you may have learned during that reporting process. This is very often what status reports look like. We're talking about the same kinds of work. The status report itself is not incredibly valuable or insightful to people who care about it. But most importantly, it again is the same thing as kind of getting off the exit ramp. We're taking our focus away from the actual productive work. Perhaps a better status report would be a way of observing the writing itself. And this would be a clearer way to provide a status. If you're looking for ongoing information, if you want to look more into it, what is a way that you can get more direct reporting out of the work itself? Again, if we're thinking about this principle, there are 100 other things that we could derive from the principle itself, reducing interruption. And the effect of reducing interruption is it provides the opportunity to stay focused, to have fewer things that are in progress or fewer things that are requiring your attention. You fill up the gas tank and then you just drive, and you stay kind of utilized, if you want to use that word, to a degree that you are remaining focused and you're making progress towards your motivation. You're making meaningful progress. You're not stopping progress to then make a different kind of progress towards a similar motivation. You're staying focused on fewer things at once. The second principle is a good complement to the first one, and that is planning adjustments. Planning adjustments. What does this mean? As you are making progress towards your motivation, If you put your head down and you don't ever evaluate if your actions are taking you the right direction, then it's very possible that you'll go the wrong direction, or at least you'll spend a lot of time moving in an inefficient direction. And basically, these two principles are reducing two types of risk of inefficient motion. The first risk of inefficient motion is stopping motion just to start again, just to stop again, just to start again. The second type of inefficient motion is moving with focus, but in a wrong direction. And this wrong direction, hopefully most of the time, if you're adjusting consistently, if you're planning your adjustments, once again, this principle, if you're planning your adjustments, then the wrong direction is only slightly wrong. But if you never plan to have an adjustment, it's very possible that you'll continue getting further and further away from your motivation. Now, unlike a road trip, this is where the metaphor kind of falls apart. Unlike a road trip, your motivation has no explicitly clear destination or route to arrive. And so as you are taking action in your career or in your personal life, as you are focusing and trying to use your time as efficiently and positively as possible towards your motivation, your adjustment may happen in two ways, okay? Either your motivation has shifted, this is an important thing to know, or you realize that the direction you're going, that you've been going for a while, right? That you recognize that the direction you're going is not taking you towards your motivation like you thought it would. And both of these can happen simultaneously. You may find out as you're approaching your motivation, for example, oh, actually, I didn't want to do that. Actually, that motivation is not quite true for some reason or another. Now, the astute listener, hopefully, is recognizing there's some very careful language here. Planning your adjustments is critical. The planning part is the careful language, because these two principles can be at odds with each other. Think about it. If your goal is to reduce interruptions, but you're making adjustments, an adjustment could become interruptive. So there's kind of a sneaky third principle here, which is balancing these two other principles. Balancing your interruption with your adjustment. Now you'll notice that I left out a perhaps third principle, and this was done on purpose. And that is the sheer speed, the top capacity. If you were to be fully focused and if you were to be headed in the right direction, making the proper adjustments, the only thing remaining that will make you more productive is the speed at which you operate. The reason I left this out is because it is very likely the lowest leverage opportunity on this list. It's very likely the lowest leverage opportunity on this list. And the reason for that is your speed is unlikely to increase or have an impact on your progress relative to these other two measures. Your personal capacity. If you're learning on a regular basis, then your speed is already increasing. The fact that you are actually, operating on a day-to-day basis in an environment, you are naturally increasing. This is, again, where the metaphor does not quite cover the bases here. But your speed is not going to increase in a stepwise motion. Right? If you were to eliminate all distractions, you're going to have a overnight, in a moment, increase in productivity that is drastic. If you're eliminating your distractions, or even if you're cutting them in half, if you're finding a way to eliminate interruptions, this is a moment in time change. And in reality, it probably wouldn't be a moment in time, but it's possible, right? It's possible to have a moment in time change on both making an adjustment and on reducing your interruptions. Now, it's interesting. Most advice about improving your velocity is actually focused on reducing interruptions. Leveling up your sheer capacity is a much longer term investment, and it certainly is not one we want to ignore completely. But the first two kind of principles that I want you to focus on is getting this part correct, right? Getting your operating procedures correct, because your speed is dependent on getting those two things right. Your speed mattering is dependent on getting those other two things right. So I wouldn't worry too much on, becoming the 10x developer in terms of your sheer capacity to get things done when you are focused. The differences between a true, 10x and 1x developer, if we have to talk about that here, most of them are actually in these other two categories. Staying laser focused and reducing the interruptions is a huge part of whatever that 10x is. Of course, learning about the domain, learning about the tech, all of that is important. You wouldn't be where you are today as an engineer if you didn't learn some of that stuff in the beginning. And you're likely, in order just to keep your job, right? You're probably having to learn new things. Yes, this will increase your kind of linear delivery capacity, if you want to think about it that way, your top speed on a straightaway on the highway. But most of the time, if you can get these other two factors right, your top speed matters drastically less. Right? It matters drastically less than you making good adjustments, planning your adjustments on some cadence where you're balancing your adjustments to your interruptions. If you're a manager that's listening to this, these are the areas that you can improve your team best in. If you can reduce interruptions across your whole team, it's going to have a much larger impact than if you were to get your team training on some particular tech. My challenge to you, we're not going to do homework in this episode. My challenge to you is to listen out. Listen out for if you have another podcast that's about to play right after this one finishes, listen for the kinds of advice that you're hearing and try to see, does it fit one of these two categories? If not, what is a category or a principle that it would fit? What is a underlying truth that's going to carry me towards my motivation if I take this advice? What you'll find is most advice is likely to fall in one of these two and possibly that third one. And if it doesn't, then it's worth questioning, how does this fit into the picture? How does it help me get to that other piece? It's very possible that you find advice that kind of leads to, that maybe doesn't fit directly in one of these categories, but it leads to a behavior that improves one of these categories. I'd love to hear about your experiences with this. If you have advice that fits outside of these, or if you're finding advice that, yes, indeed, it does fit in both of these categories, I'd love to hear about it. Head over to developert.com/Discord. You can join that community totally free. And it will always be free. There's no paid tier. It's not just the joining that's free. Come and talk about the kinds of advice that you're getting and how they kind of work back towards a principle. I'd love to hear more about that. That's developert.com/Discord. The community would also love to hear that as well. Another big thank you to today's sponsor, Jam. If you've experienced a bad bug report and you want that to stop, then head over to jam.dev. If you're an engineer and you'd rather spend time writing code than responding to comments in your issue tracker, head over to jam.dev to get started. It's free. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and until next time, enjoy your tea.